The special audit report, which the Vice President Constantino Chiwenga, in his other hat as the Health and Childcare Minister, sought to conceal, exposes massive abuse of COVID-19 funds and fingers executives in deliberate efforts to manipulate figures to evade detection. It has emerged. Chiwenga sat in the report for months, resulting in the Auditor General Mildred Chiri resorting to directing them a copy of the report to the National Assembly Speaker Jacob Mudenda for tabling in Parliament. Auditors noted systematic abuse of funds, including how fake names, identity documents, and mobile phone numbers were used in the grant looting scheme, in which 890 million may have been stolen. The audit was funded by the World Bank, and it focused mainly on how the COVID-19 relief funds were dispersed, management of quarantine centers and isolation centers, among other issues. The easing of some controls and the streamlining of processes and procedures to facilitate emergency responses and quick actions to the crisis exposed the government to the possible risks of misuse or abuse of public resources, Chiri said. Inadequate record keeping was a common feature, as the ministries, departments, and agencies did not always have updated or reliable information on the donations received and distributed, goods and services delivered, and reports on the implementation status of the government initiatives to fight the pandemic. This resulted in some beneficiaries, including the government officials, receiving COVID-19 relief disbursements they might not have been entitled to. This defeated the purpose for which the disbursements were made, as intended beneficiaries could have been deprived of the assistance. COVID-19 allowances were supposed to be paid to small to medium enterprises whose incomes were affected by lockdown, food insecure households, people with disabilities, the elderly, chronically ill persons, and child-headed households. Information on the world-to-be beneficiaries was forwarded to the Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare Ministry through the Provincial Social Welfare offices. On the disbursement of over 89,022,103, Chiri said the main reasons that caused the failure were that the processes of identification and assessment of intended beneficiaries was not properly coordinated, resulting in unreliable databases of beneficiaries, processing of payments to duplicate beneficiary names, and beneficiaries who had similar identity numbers but of different gender and dates of birth. There was also processing of payments to beneficiaries with fictitious identity numbers and suspicious names, incorrect and insufficient contact addresses, as well as the use of similar contact addresses for beneficiaries in districts. No follow-up mechanism was developed to verify the existence of the beneficiaries and whether the allowance had reached the intended beneficiaries. No feedback in the form of patients were provided by the Public Service Ministry head office to provincial and district offices regarding the names of beneficiaries who had qualified and had been paid the COVID-19 relief allowances to facilitate confirmation of receipt and reconciliations. On COVID-19 relief allowances for youths, sportspersons and artists, the AG raised the red flag on the criteria that was used for selection and registration of beneficiaries. The red flag was also raised on allowances paid to government employees without competent authority. The COVID-19 allowances and airtime paid to government employees, 7 ministries, departments and agencies in Manicaland, Mashonaland West and Matabeleland South paid COVID-19 allowances totaling to 2,654,089 and airtime worth 22,165 to members of staff reporting for duty during the lockdown period covering April to July 2020 without competent authority. Management of quarantine centers was also made in controversy, as the cost of food provisions, accommodation, daily upkeep and transport of the inmates at the quarantine center was not properly handled. there were no clear and documented guidelines on the process of determining the amount of bus fare to be given to discharged inmates. In some instances, there was no evidence that the discharged inmates had received the indicated amounts, as they did not sign on the payment schedule. On monument for the drilling of boreholes, she said, out of 48 boreholes that the DDF had planned to drill in the 6 provinces I visited, 31 boreholes were drilled but were not functional as water pumps had not been installed. 8 of the boreholes were not drilled, 3 boreholes were drilled and water pumps installed were 6 dry holes as at December 12, 2020.